Have you thought about why cameras have been so popular the last few years to use as a sensor? We see them in IoT, we see them in building automation, and we see them in smart cities. And this is despite the fact that privacy legislations has been much increased in the last few years, like the introduction of the GDPR, which effectively affects every company operating in Europe. So what is the good thing about camera sensors? I think there are two main things about camera sensors that we need to consider. The first one is the flexibility. A camera sensor typically collects a much richer information than what we actually need to solve the problem at hand. And this allows us some flexibility in how we use the data and in the use case. If the use case change, or the environment change, or the requirements for the data that we need changes, then instead of physically going out to swap out a sensor, which we would need in the case of a simple narrow sensor, instead we can just push a new software update. And in the long term, this is of course much cheaper, even if the upfront cost is higher than a simple sensor. And the other thing is that a camera is much more relatable to and easier to understand. If you, for example, compare a camera to a LIDAR or a camera to a radar, and if you consider a situation such as fog or mist or rain, since we are so used to deal with the visual spectrum of light, we can very easily understand in what cases a camera will struggle and in what cases it will work. The same is not the case for a radar, for example, where it demands very specific knowledge to even understand what situations we should look out for. So these two things have been the same all the time. So why have we seen the recent upswing in the use of cameras the last few years? I think there are two main reasons for this too. What we typically do is that we have a system something like this, where we have some kind of cloud or server which performs the actual image analysis or video analysis. And then we have the camera itself located on the edge at the client or customer site. And this means that we are actually streaming video, images and audio from the camera to the server. And this of course puts much demands on the communication in between them. We need high-speed communication, we need high bandwidth communication, and we need it for a low cost. And this is something that we have seen the last few years, that we have seen the introduction of 4G and 5G mobile communications, which allows higher speed, higher bandwidth, and typically to a much lower cost than what it was before. And we also have high quality fiber optics and Ethernet, which allows high speed and high bandwidth. But the other thing is that we have seen a change in the layout of this system. Instead of performing all the analytics at the server side or in the cloud, we have moved it down to the cameras to perform the actual analytics on the camera device itself on the edge. And this of course goes very much in line with privacy legislations like GDPR. This is something that has increased the last few years too, and this would, in theory, push the use of sensors from cameras to other kind of sensors which are more anonymous by the information they collect. But what we do now is that we perform the analytics in the cameras itself. And this makes sure that the personal identifiable information never leaves the camera itself, but it's actually locked into the camera, while what we send here is only metadata. And this is of course good for the communication too. Metadata is much smaller than image or video data, so we don't need as high demands on the speed and bandwidth, and the cost will be reduced. So these two facts together are something that I think have been very much in favor for the use of cameras. And what we see in the cameras and edge devices today is that we see much more powerful CPUs. We see the introduction of GPUs and neural network accelerators, which enable us to do this complex analytics in the camera instead of in the cloud. If you're interested in the use cases for cameras and how they can be used for analytics and computer vision, then you should take a look at my articles and my posts, and also a look at my GitHub, where I share a lot of code doing image analytics from cameras. And another thing about cameras is of course the reduce in price that we've seen lately. Of course, a simple sensor like a motion detector is much cheaper than a camera. But today we can actually find cameras like this for just a few euros. If you want a high quality network connected camera, it will probably set you back a few €100. But this is still much cheaper than most LIDARs, for example. Stay tuned.